I'm a Salesforce at Austin, Texas, and I'm pretty Flow's my favorite thing about Salesforce, and I write about Flow every Monday through Friday on LinkedIn, just sharing things I've learned about using the tool, because I know there's a lot of people right now that are trying to learn Flow. So I'm really grateful for being invited along to talk to you about Flow tonight. So I'm just gonna go ahead and dive in because I've got quite a lot that I want to cover. So the theme of this presentation is 6 must-know concepts when learning record-triggered flows. So first and foremost, why record-triggered flows? So obviously there's a lot to Flow. It's not just record-triggered flows. So why are we focusing on them? Well, really, I'm sure most of you are aware that process builder and workflow rules are going to be retiring. And really a key milestone in them retiring is stopping the ability to create new workflow rules and new process builders. So as you can see from the timeline that I've got here on the screen taken from Salesforce, by about October of this year, if everything stays as planned, you're no longer going to be able to create workflow rules. And then early next year, you're no longer going to be able to create new process builders. So what that means is, since record-triggered flows are the replacement for those tools, it's really time sensitive for everyone in the Salesforce ecosystem and admins who are used to these older tools to really get a handle on record-triggered flows. So that's why I'm focusing on them today. So at a very high level, these are the 6 concepts that I want to walk through. Really, I think these are really foundational things that will set you on the path to learning more about record-triggered flows. Obviously, this isn't everything with record-triggered flows. There's a lot more to it, but I'm confident that these topics will put you on the right path. So just a quick note as well, as I'm going through this, I'll try and stop along the way to see if anyone has questions on any of these, but feel free to call out and let me know if you do. Okay, so first and foremost, I think the really foundational thing to know about record-triggered flows is understanding the power of $record. So what is $record? So $record is a record variable that is automatically created when record-triggered flows run. And so what $record has is it gives you access to all of the field values of the record the flow is running on. So obviously in your automation logic, knowing what the current field values are is really important, and all of that is stored in $record. Now, another cool thing about $record is that it gives you access to the field values of parent records too. So if you have a record-triggered flow running on an opportunity, you can navigate to the $record variable, and you can then access the account fields and use those in your logic as well. And then what this means is, because you have access to this type of data, $record's very useful in helping you do things like get records, like getting child records, creating child records, and you can use it in your decisions and formulas. So really, when you're working in record-triggered flows, you really need to get to know the record variable $record, because you'll be using it all the time. So what it offers is really important. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into a demo and kind of show you some examples. So you can see Salesforce here. I'm just going to pull up a flow.
Yes.
All right, so at this point, I'm not really necessarily going to demo a use case right now. We're definitely going to go through some but I just wanted to kind of show you how $record appears in the UI. So obviously I've just selected an account flow that runs on create and update, and I'll just select actions and related records here, which is an after save flow. So the first thing you'll notice is, if you're familiar with Flow already, you're probably familiar that on the manager side over here, you usually see things like record variables that you create. So $record doesn't appear there. It's an automatically created one, but it's not going to show up in this toolbox. So let me just give you an example. Let's say we need a decision in our account flow. And the decision we want to check is check account rating is hot. So let's say this is where we say, yes, it is hot. So the way you can find out whether it's hot is by clicking into this field here. And if you scroll down, you'll see here $record. And what this is all of the account fields. So if you click on this here, now you have access to all of the account fields. So I can scroll down here and go to the rating, and I can say equals hot. So that's just one example where you regularly might use $record in your record triggered flows in decisions. Now, another example is, let's say that our decision needs to check the parent account values, because obviously an account can then have a parent account. So let me close this. So I click in here and I click on $record. And then you'll see here, all of these items with the arrow here are basically parent relationships. So you see this one here, parent account ID. So if I click that, I now have access to all of the field values on the parent account too. So I could actually have this decision not check the rating on the current record, but check it on the parent record. And that's all accessible again through $record, showing why this is such an important area of flow to be familiar with. Now, another scenario is, let's say you need to get all of the child records. So this is again a flow running on the account object. Let's assume you need to get all of the child opportunities. Well, the $record variable is pretty integral to doing that. So you would click here on get records, and we'll just call this child ops. And we want to get opportunity. And so here, condition requirements. Obviously, we want to have conditions because we don't want to just get every single opportunity in the system. So how do I identify which opportunities are related to the account that the flow is running on? Well, so opportunities have a field that looks up to the account ID field. So we're going to say, I want to get opportunities where the account ID equals $record. And then I can select here, and I can scroll down to the ID field. So basically, this filter condition here is going to get me all of the child opportunities associated with the account the flow is running on. So I just wanted to give these as sort of a foundational first step, just to really get you familiar with what $record is and some of the ways that it's useful, because really when you're working with record triggered flows, you're going to constantly be referencing it. So before I move on, does anyone sort of have any high level questions on $record, or did any of that not make sense? Okay. I will
Stephen, when we have a screen flow, can we use a $record as well?
That's a great question. So $record is not in screen flows. So the difference with screen flows is you would need to actually create the record variable. So let's say you have a screen flow that's running on the account. So you would go into the screen flow, you would create an account record variable manually, and then you would need to pass that into your screen flow. So you can do that by configuring your quick actions and your lightning pages to basically populate that record into the record variable. So yeah, it's different for screen flows.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Alrighty, so now we've covered that foundation. Let's jump back in. Okay. So the next concept, I think, is one of the most simple and powerful things that you can do to build better record triggered flows. And it really involves following a golden rule on when to use before and after save flows. So if we look at the top here, let's start with the scenario where automation is needed on a record that's created or edited. So the golden rule and the question you need to ask yourself is, are you updating the same record that was created or edited? If the answer to that question is yes, then it's best to use a before save flow, which is called fast field updates. And if the answer to that question is no, you're updating a different record or creating related records or doing email alerts, then it's better to use an after save flow, which are called actions and related records. So it's all good me saying that, but it's good to know why. So why is that the case? Well, first and foremost, before save flows are pretty limited from an action perspective. All you can do in a before save flow is update the same record that was created or edited. Now, you can also do that in an after save flow. So then the question becomes, is it more efficient to update the same record that was created or edited in a before save flow or an after save flow? And like I've sort of emphasized already, the answer to that is resoundingly, it's more efficient in a before save flow. And to understand why, you have to kind of be introduced and be at least at a high level familiar with the order of execution. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, have heard about it to some extent. Some of you may know it very, very well. But basically the order of execution is essentially when a record is created or edited, it essentially is all of the logic that Salesforce runs in a certain order. So it covers all sorts of things: validation rules, triggers, escalation rules. There's a lot more to it than flow. But what we can see from the image here is just really showing where record triggered flows fit into that. So you have the order of execution starting, you have before save flows running before the record is saved. The record gets saved, but it's not fully committed or fully committed to the database. Then you have your after save flows run, and then everything is done. So the reason before save flows are more efficient for these same record updates is kind of easier to understand when we look at the path a flow may move through or a record may move through. So let's take the example here. So this is an example of the path a record will take when it's updated or changed by a before save flow. So the order of execution starts, which means a new record was created or a record was changed. The before save flow changes the record is saved, and then the record is committed, meaning everything is done. So you can see here, it's a very straight and linear path. Because the before save flow is changing it before it's saved, that record doesn't need to get resaved and go back through the path. Now, so if we compare this to an after save flow, so you have the order of execution starting on when a record is created or edited, then the record gets saved, then the after save flow resaves that same record. Now, because the record is already been saved, to fully make the changes that the after save flow did, it has to go back through the save process. So you can see here that the process isn't as linear and straight, and this resaving of the record causes some of the save process to happen again. So that's really the crux of why a before save flow is more efficient for these same record changes. So I'm going to jump into a use case, but I just want to check, does anyone have any questions on that we just walked through? Okay, so the use case that we're going to demo here is when the account rating is changed to hot, we want to do a couple of things. We want to update an account field called customer priority, and this is a custom field I created. We want to update that to high. And then what we also want to do is we want to create an opportunity for a sort of premium or white glove service if there's no opportunity for that already. So based on what we just spoke about with before and after save flows, the way that I would approach this use case is we would have a before save flow to do the same record change. So that would be to change the account. So actually, sorry, I made a typo here. This should say change the customer priority to high on the left hand. We would have a before save flow to do that. And then we would have an after save flow to create the opportunity record. So the reason, again, we're doing that is because the same record change is more efficient in the before save flow, and creating a new record, we can't do that in a before save flow. So we would do that in an after save flow. So I'm going to jump into Flow and start building this. If anyone wants to throw out any questions at me before I start doing that, I'm all ears. All right, so, okay, so we have a flow here, a record triggered flow. It's running on an account when an account is updated. So the entry conditions we have here are that the account rating is hot. So that was one of the things in our. But also what we have is that the account rating is changed. So it was updated to hot. We don't want this to just run every time it's hot. So I would select the rating field again here, and do true. So this basically tells me, these two here is telling me that the rating on the account was changed to hot. And then the last thing we want to do is, because it is updating the customer priority field to high, we only want to run this flow if this isn't already high. There's no sense in this flow running if it's already high. So I put here that the customer priority does not equal high. Now, if we scroll down here, you'll see the two options. So fast field updates means before save flow, and active records means after save flow. So we're going to select before save flow here. And so that's sort of the entry conditions for the flow set up. Now, from a flow perspective, this is a pretty straightforward one. So there's two ways that you can update the same record in a before save flow. The first option you have is click here, update triggering, and we'll put customer priority equals high. And so what you can do here, we don't need any other conditions here because we've checked all of that up front, is that the customer priority equals high. But that's the one way you can do it. Now, interestingly, with before save flows, you can actually do this with an assignment element too. So if I click assignment, we do customer priority equals high. And this shows another scenario where you can use $record. So you click into the variable that you want to change. And what we're wanting to change is the record that triggered the flow. So I click $record account. And then we have, sorry, we were changing the customer priority here. And we do equals high. So this is actually going to do the exact same thing as the update records element, but that only applies to before save flows. So in terms of which one's better to do or which one should you do, I don't think there's really a clear better practice. I would say probably do what is consistent with your org, like what other people are doing in your org or what you agreed to do. So I'm just going to save this quickly. And I'm going to activate this. So that's the first flow done to do the same record change. So now what we need to do is we need to have the after save flow to create the opportunity. So again, I'll select record triggered flow here. And this is running on the account again. Have it running on update for this use case. So the condition requirements here are going to be similar, but not the same. So again, we're going to have that the rating on the account equals hot. And we're going to have that the rating is changed. But what I don't want to do here is I don't want to include the customer priority does not equal high. Does anyone have any thoughts on why that may be? Okay, so the reason is because the before, oh, go ahead.
No, nothing. Kachiani, after your presentation about it, you asked the one question, then I asked you after this one, okay?
Okay, sorry. Were you talking to me there, Guilherme, or did you want me to carry on?
I think my video is out. Okay, Kachiani asked you a question. Is it okay to keep your combined apex before, after triggers and before save flows? Would you recommend to pick one of these?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think it depends on your org, right? And like what people you have working in your org. So if you have lots of developers and minimal admins, perhaps it would make sense to do more stuff in triggers. But if you have lots of admins who can maintain flows, then I think it makes sense to do flows. What I'm going to actually do, I don't know if you've ever read the Record-Triggered Architect Guide produced by Salesforce, but I'm going to put that in the chat because I think this is a really good decision guide that sort of goes through some of the considerations you should have when deciding between things like triggers and flows. So to answer the question as best as I can today, I don't think there's one clear-cut answer that I can give. I think a lot of it's going to depend on the complexity of your automations, who you have on your team. So I would strongly recommend reading that Record-Triggered Architect. It gives some good considerations in deciding that. Hope that helps. Right, I'll carry on. So the reason we're not going to check the customer priority is because the before save flow runs before the after save flow. So the before save flow has already changed the customer priority to high. So checking wouldn't work in this scenario. So that's why we don't check that here. Okay. So what I want to do, the first thing in our requirement was to check if there was an existing opportunity that already had this white glove service that we spoke about. So what I'm going to do is have a get records. And what I want to do is I want to get an opportunity. And so what we walked through earlier, I want to get child opportunities. So this is where the account ID equals $record and then the ID. This is the ID of the record that triggered the flow. Now, let's just say for simplicity's sake, the way we name these opportunities in our org, they just have the text white glove service. And I'm not sure if white glove service, I'm not sure how familiar you are with that term, but in the States and the UK, it kind of just means like a premium exclusive type service is what white glove means in this context. And then what we also want to check is because this is only, we want to check that the status isn't, not status, stage. So we're checking that there's no open opportunities for the white glove service. So I'm just going to check that the status does not equal closed one. Keep saying status, I mean stage. It's not equal closed lost. So basically what this is going to do is this is going to return me any opportunities for the white glove service where the stage is not closed won or closed lost. Now, in a real sort of production scenario, maybe there would be some logic you add here. Well, if we already have one closed won, we don't need to sell it again. I sort of realizing that now, but I think let's just carry on with this example where we're trying to find opportunities that aren't closed won or aren't closed lost. So what I want to do here is get all of the records. And for this example, we'll just store all of the fields. I'll go through some other examples later where we choose particularly which fields we want to store. So what we're doing here is we're checking if there's an opportunity that is basically the same as the one we might already be creating. So now what we do is we have a decision. So we're checking, is there a white glove service op? So we will say yes here or no. So it's a simple yes or no. So the way that we check this is to see if there were any records returned from the get records previously. So in the decision here, resource, this is what we're checking. We select the record collection variable. So this is the opportunities that were returned from the previous get records. And what we're going to say is does not equal null, false. oh, sorry, is null is what I meant to select. Is null equals false. So what this is saying is the previous get records is not null. So what that means is that there is already an opportunity the same as the one we're creating. So we don't want to go ahead and create another one. So if there is already one, then what we're going to do here is we're going to end the flow. Because if there's one, we don't really need to go ahead and do anything else. And then what we'll do, if there isn't an opportunity for this already, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the create records. So let's see, create records. Service op. So what we're doing here is we're just creating one opportunity, and we're going to specify the values we want for this record. Okay, so what we want is we want this opportunity to be the child of the record that triggered the flow. So again, you'll see us using $record here. And then we want the amount. Just for this example, we'll just put in the amount as 10,000, just to keep it simple. The stage name, we'll default this to prospecting. And then what we want to do is maybe have some kind of naming convention for our opportunities. So this is a good example of where we can use formulas. So I've gone here, close this out just to show you, new resource, formula. And so what we'll do is generate op name. And so this is a good example of how you can use a formula. So I'll search $record account and then the name. So this is basically the name of the account. And then on top of that, I'm going to add space and a dash and put white glove service. So this will generate the account name with a space, dash, and white glove service as the name of the opportunity. And we're going to select the data type as text. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to probably have our close date for the opportunity be dynamic. Obviously, we don't want to hard code that. So generate close date. And then I am going to select date as the data type. And then so I'll just do today, which returns the current date plus 7. Let's just say we want the opportunities to default to a week away. So now I can go back to my create records. I've got these fields already, but now what I can do is the name of the opportunity can be the formula, generate opportunity name. And the close date can be the generate due date or close date. I'll save that. Let me just check this quickly. Okay. All right, so this flow should be ready to go. Let me just save this. Let's check we have no problems activating it. Okay, that looks good. I'm just going to check this one more time. ID name contains white glove. Okay, so we've got two flows here. Before say flow that changes the customer priority to high. And then we have this here that creates the opportunity if one doesn't already exist. So I'm going to open up a record. So we'll see here on this one here. So the rating is currently blank and the customer priority is blank. And if we look, there's no related opportunities. So what should happen is if I change this to hot, we should see the customer priority change to high, and we should see the opportunity. So good news, the customer priority changed to high. So that was the before save flow. And here we have the opportunity. So you can see here, firstly, the account name, I just called it slide 16 demo. That's the name of the account. And you see how it's generated the name here based on the account. We've got the close date as well. Remember, we used a formula for that. So that's now calculated that 7 days out. And then some of the other field values we've got in there. So this is a good example, I think, of how you can break a requirement up into a before save flow and an after save flow to make it more efficient. Because if we had just dumped all of that in one after save flow, like let's say I'd saved the account here too, then basically I'm making 2 saves to the database instead of 1. So by breaking it up this way, it's more efficient and doing less operations, saving records. So I'm going to close that out and this record. Does anyone have any questions on that use case or anything I did there?
Nobody. But you presented a lot of features inside one feature. Thank you.
Okay, cool. I will keep powering on, but yeah, let me know for sure if there's any questions. Yeah. All right. So the next concept that I want to go through is flows per object strategies. So this is probably one of the most hotly debated things when it comes to flow, and that is how many flows should you have on an object? And so the way I like to explain this is there's what I call the established strategy, and then the new strategy, which starts to emerge based on new features. So the established strategy you may have heard is where you would have one flow of each type on an object. So you would have one before save flow, one after save flow, and one before delete flow. Now, the reason that it was that way is because until recently, there was no way that you could control the order in which your flows ran. So if you had 5 after save flows on the account, then you have no way to determine what order they run in. And then the problem you're going to have there is that's going to make things like testing and debugging difficult because the flows just don't run in a reliable order. So that approach made sense. Now, what we've seen recently with Flow, and especially I think it's 2 releases back now, is really some game-changing features. So a couple of releases back, we were now given the ability to control the order in which our flows run. So that problem that we had that was making everyone use this established strategy is really no longer a problem. So this has seen the emergence of a newer strategy, which is where you have many flows of each type. And you have small flows for specific use cases, and you use entry conditions, which we've sort of looked at a little bit, to only run flows when they need to run. And then you use the new feature to control the order that the flows run in. Now, as far as I'm aware, Salesforce hasn't made any explicit recommendations. They haven't said that one thing is better, one approach is better than the other. But if you look at the bullet points below the table here, especially number 2, this is actually from the Record-Triggered Architect Guide that I put in the chat. You'll see that the second point is basically saying, if you can have flows only run when they need to run by using entry conditions, then you're going to see significant performance improvements, as opposed to flows just running all the time and maybe not even doing anything. So what I want to do for the rest of this third point we're covering is just give a couple of examples on how you can do this. So like, how can you use the entry conditions feature? And then how can you control the order that the flows run in? So you've seen from the demo I've done already is when you're configuring a record-triggered flow, you have this basic user interface where you can select fields from that particular object and do things like, say, equals, does not equal. And then you can select all conditions are met. You can have the or logic instead, or you can have the custom condition logic. Now, what I think is one of the coolest things that they've done with Flow in a while from the last release is they now give us the ability to use formulas to decide when flows run. And I think this is super helpful because this opens up a lot of new capabilities and allows you to be more specific about when flows run in ways that you couldn't be previously, or maybe you could, but it took some weird workaround to do it. And so I just want to give you a couple of examples here. I'm not going to dive into Flow for this because we've got a lot to cover, but just walk through some of these screenshots. So you can see with this formula here, what this formula is doing, it's saying only run the flow if the name of the record type is test. Now, this is really valuable because previously, before this functionality was here, you could only have the record type ID in your conditions. And then what that would involve is the difficult question about am I going to hard code an ID in my entry conditions? And we'll get into hard coding IDs in a bit, but generally it's not a good practice since IDs can be different in different environments. But here with this formula functionality, you can just check the name of the record type, which is consistent across environments usually. Another example here is you can also check the parent account fields. So we've spoke about $record, but if you look at this formula, this is from a record-triggered flow running on the opportunity object. So what it's doing, it's only running if the parent account rating is hot. Obviously, the opportunity would still need to be created or edited to trigger this at all, but the condition is looking at the parent record, which is a cool feature to have as well. Another one here is where you can actually look at the prior values of a record in deciding whether it runs or not. So before this formula functionality was here, we could have a condition that says run a flow if the rating is changed. But there was no way for you to say, to add to your logic to check what it was changed from. So what this formula is doing is saying, only run this flow if the account rating is changed and it was changed from hot. So again, think about what Salesforce, the bullet points I put on a couple of slides back said. It emphasized the more you can stop flows running when they don't need to run, the better performance you can get. So as you can see, this is getting really specific as opposed to just saying run the flow when the account rating is hot. And I won't dive too much into $record prior, but if you notice that here, $record prior is very similar to $record. It's just all of the prior field values. So that's a really useful thing to be able to utilize in Flow as well. And then another cool thing is you can look at the user that triggered the flow. So this formula is saying only run the flow if the role of the person that created or edited the record is sales. So again, this is something you couldn't do before. It lets you be more specific. And you can even use custom permissions. So you can check whether someone has a permission and run a flow. Now this is checking, do they have the permission? I could easily modify this flow and put not in front of the permission there and only run the flow if they don't have a permission. So I guess the point I'm trying to make with these formula examples is you can see how much more flexibility we have now in being really specific about when our flows run and try to get those performance benefits that Salesforce mentioned. Now, so that was the first part of the new strategy. Remember, there were two parts. There was using entry conditions to only run the flows when they need to, which we just walked through. And then there was also controlling the order in which the flows run. And so on that point, if you go into the properties of a flow, like the little gear icon, you'll see this field trigger order. And what you can do is you can populate that with a number value, and that basically determines the order in which the flows run. So let's say you have 5 flows, after save flows on the account, and they're numbered 1, 10, 20, 30, 40. Those flows are going to run in numerical order, starting with the smallest. So the one with trigger order 1 will go first, then 10, then 20, and so on. So that's how you control the order. But now you may be familiar, they've also introduced the Flow Trigger Explorer, which is a much more kind of user-friendly interface. It gives you more of a view of all of the flows on an object, and you can drag and drop your flows here as opposed to clicking into the properties of each one. So the last thing I want to mention on the flows per object strategies is I generally like exploring the concept of having multiple flows per object, this new strategy. But one thing I'll caution you on, and one thing that I'm very conscious about when I build flows, is having multiple after save flows all running at the same time and updating the same record. So the reason I do that is because let's look at the example here. Let's assume you have 4 after save flows, and these may all have entry conditions. But if you have scenarios in your org where all 4 of the conditions for these flows are all met at the same time, what you're going to end up doing is resaving the same related record 4 times. So obviously that's not particularly efficient. So really just when you're building your after-save flows for an object, I think it's really important to have a good idea of when your automations run, perhaps how frequently they run, and consider ways that you can consolidate changes so you're not resaving the same record over and over. For example, let's say you had an object and it was related to 3 or 4 objects. Maybe you could have one dedicated after-save flow just to handle the changes on that object, and then you're not resaving the same record over and over again. So that was what I had on the flows per object strategies. Just
we have
check, see if there's
Steven, sorry.
Yeah,
we have 2 questions here from Leonardo Cesar Nascimento. He told, can a flow performance be impacted when we use the contains condition when filtering a text field?
So are you talking about in the entry conditions, Leonardo, or are you kind of talking just generally in the entry conditions, or a formula generally?
I think it's a formula generally.
Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. So I would say I personally haven't, if you're using formulas responsibly and not doing extremely complex formulas, I doubt you're really going to run into a great deal of performance issues. But I'll also point you back to that record triggered architect guide, because there is a section in there, and maybe I can see if I can actually pull it up and show you. But they do talk about formulas can sometimes have problems with really complex ones. Let me just pull this over. So if you see here, so I'll just point you to this bullet point here. So this is in the record triggered architect guide, but it says that sometimes if you have really complex formulas in your flow, flow may not be particularly efficient at processing them, especially if you're maybe dealing with lots of records maybe being inserted into the Salesforce at one time. So I would say probably for a simple contains, I can't imagine you're going to have any kind of serious issues. But if you start doing really, really complex formulas, and those formulas are running when you're importing hundreds of records, it might be something you want to kind of keep an eye on. It's a good question there.
Good one. Giselle have another question. From what he saw, we have a limit of 2,000 flows. By applying the new strategy, don't we run the risk of reaching this limit for a large project?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. And I think a lot of this is going to come down to your org, right? Like how many objects you're dealing with, how many automations. I can't see who asked that question, but I certainly think it's a really good thing to keep in mind. If that's a risk, then you may need to reconsider your strategy. That's pretty much what I've got to say on that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. No more questions.
All right, cool. Okay, all right, so let's dive back in. All right, so the next concept that I wanted to go through, and we sort of touched this a little bit in the last one, is consolidating database changes. So these elements that we've got here up on the screen, using these elements in after-save flows, they use up Salesforce governor limits. So what we want to do is we want to minimize and consolidate them where possible. And so we've sort of touched on this topic a little bit. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with governor limits, but just at a very high level, Salesforce limits how many times we can do things like create records, update records, and delete records. So really, when we're building flows, we shouldn't be thinking about just completely, the goal isn't to not hit limits.
Steven, The audio is off, is on mute. Try to turn on again.
I don't know how that happened. Am I back?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's BV. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Now I can.
All right. Did you hear anything I said on the previous slide, or do you want me to run through?
No, please repeat.
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for letting me know. All right. So yeah, what we want to do, one thing we want to be careful of when we're working with Flow is we want to consolidate and not overuse elements where we're making changes to records, and because I'm sure many of you are familiar with governor limits, and elements such as create records, update records, and delete records, they use up Salesforce governor limits. So Salesforce limits how many times we can create records, update records, delete records. So we want to minimize them and consolidate them where possible. Now, it's easy for me to sit here and say, do that, but how do you do that? So I'm going to walk through just a couple of approaches that I find useful for doing this. So let's take a scenario where you're working on an after-save flow that could potentially make multiple changes to a parent record. So the general process I would follow for this, and I'll give a demo of this in a moment, but I just kind of wanted to give an overview of what's involved. I'd create a record variable for the parent record. You can use decisions to determine what changes are needed. You can use assignments to set the record variable fields, and you can use an update records on the record variable at the end of the flow. So let's do a demo of this. So the use case we have here is when an opportunity is updated to closed won, what we want to do is we want to set the account rating to hot if it isn't already hot, and we want to set the customer priority to high if it isn't already high. So let's jump into that. Where are we? There we go. Okay, so I'm going to jump into a flow. And so this is when an opportunity is closed won, we're updating the account. So we're going to do a record triggered flow on the opportunity. And so we want this to run when the opportunity is updated. And because we're updating the account, this is going to be an after save flow. So this is a good example of where we can use formula. So I'm going to pre-prepared this formula. I'm going to paste it in, but I will explain what it means. So what we have here is we have a formula that says run this flow when the opportunity stage is changed, the opportunity stage is closed won. So what that means is the opportunity stage was changed to closed won, and at least one of these conditions is true. So the account rating is not hot, and the account rating is not high. So basically, if one of these conditions is met, that means we need to make some kind of change on the account. So I should, if I validate, check the syntax. Oh, okay, of course, I'm missing something. Let's see, I think here. Okay, so there we go, fix that. All right, so let's walk into this. So we need to update. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a variable for the parent account. So I would just call this var parent account. Data type is record. We don't need to select this checkbox because we're only dealing with one parent account. And we would select account here and click done. So that's our record variable. So when we looked at these conditions, if these conditions are true, we know for sure we need to make some kind of update to the account. So what I would do is I would use a first assignment element to assign the parent account ID to variable. So if I click here, you'll see the parent account record variable I created. Right now, this is completely empty. There's nothing in it, no field values, no ID, nothing. So if I want to update the parent account with this variable, I need to set the ID of the record being updated. So I click into it, and then if I scroll down, I can select ID. So this is saying, okay, I want to assign the account ID field in my account record variable. So then the question is, how do I get the account ID? And it all goes back to our friend $record. So if I search $record on the opportunity, click here, and you'll see here account ID. So I click this. And basically that's saying in this record variable, make the account ID field the account of the record of the parent account of the record that triggered the flow. So the account that is the parent of the opportunity that the flow is running on. So I would do that to start with. And then what you can do here is just have a couple of decisions to check the account rating and the priority. So we'll check the account rating. So we'll say this first one is the account rating is hot. And then we'll say not hot. So to check if the account rating's hot here, so again, we do $record on the opportunity. And so what I clicked on a minute ago to assign the account ID was this one here, account ID. That's the actual ID. But to get to the account fields, I need to click this one with the arrow. So then I would do that and I would search for rating. And then I'm going to say equals hot. So this is checking if the parent account rating is hot. And then if it's not, if that's, it's not hot. So we have this first decision here. So if it's not hot, then what we want to do is we want to update the account rating to hot. Now we don't want to do an update records because remember, we want to save all of the potential changes in one go. So I'm going to use another assignment element. And I'm going to go to the record variable. So this is the one with the ID in it. I'm going to select the rating and I'm going to select hot. And so what this is doing, it's making that change in the variable. This isn't saving the account yet, but it's sort of doing the prep work to do that. And then the last step is very similar to the above. We would just have another decision. So customer priority, checking what that is. And we'll just say this is high. And we'll say not high. And so again, I would check $record, go to the account, and then go to the customer priority, equals high. So very similar to the last one. And if it's not high, similar to the last one, we want to set it to high. So we'll go back to our parent account record variable, customer priority equals high. So this is basically assigning the ID to a variable and assigning the rating if needed and the customer priority if needed. Now, if we've got people who are experienced with Flow, one thing I'll point out is you could probably minimize the number of elements you have here and kind of start building formulas within maybe just one assignment element to do it all that way. So that's definitely a way you can do it, but I really wanted to just show this logic to kind of show how a record variable can be updated throughout a flow and then saved at the end. So just in case anyone was wondering, because I know that comes up quite a lot. And so what we'll do here is we'll just do an update records. So the variable now has everything. It has the ID and it has the two new field values. So I'm going to select this option, use the IDs and field values from a record collection. And all I need to do here is select var parent account. See this statement here, make sure each record has an ID, otherwise it'll fail. So that's why we did that first step at the start. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And we'll activate this without any errors. Good to go. So I am going to pull in this record. Okay, so this is an opportunity that is in negotiation review, so it's not closed one yet. And if we look at the account, so the rating is warm. So that means if we close this opportunity, that needs to change to hot. And our customer priority is low. So if we close that needs to change to high. So what should happen? Let's close this opportunity and see if it works. I'll refresh the account. All right, so the rating's hot and the customer priority is high. So what this has done is, instead of me having this flow to have 2 update records elements and resaving the same account twice, by using record variables here, I've been able to sort of track the changes as you go through the flow and then make them all in one go, again, which is more efficient than resaving the same record more than once. So any questions on that particular use case? Let me see, look at the chat.
No, it's all good. Very good one.
Cool. So I know we're a little at time, so this is probably gonna. I've probably got like another 30 minutes.
Feel free to end the presentation. Don't worry about the time. Okay?
No. I'm happy. I want to stay, but I'm just checking.
Yes.
You want me to carry on? Okay, cool.
Yes, I want to stay. So let's go.
All right. That's cool. I will carry on. All right. So what I walked through was an example where you're just changing one record. So now what the other scenario that comes up pretty common is when you need to update multiple records. So when a loop is a good example, one that you're probably familiar with if you're getting started with Flow. So when doing a loop to update multiple records, the general process to follow is to create an empty record collection variable. So what that's going to be is that's going to hold all of the records that need to change, but it will be empty when you create it. Then what you want to do is you want to loop a different record collection variable that contains all of the records you want to change. Then as you're looping it, as you go through each record, each sort of iteration of the loop, you make the changes to the current item record variable that the loop creates, and I'll show you all of that. Then you add that to the empty record collection variable. And when you've finished that outside of the loop, you update records on this whole record collection variable. So again, this is kind of a classic example of consolidating your database changes or your record changes. You could put the update records in the loop, but what that would do is maybe 2 things. One, if your flow doesn't fail, your flow is going to be way more inefficient than it needs to be because it's going to save a record each loop. And 2, if you're dealing with a lot of records, your flow could completely fail. So obviously you don't want to put the update records in the loop. So let's dive into this use case. So the use case, again, is when the account rating is updated to hot. What we want to do is we want to update the next step field on any opportunities that aren't closed. But what we want to do is we want to have a different value depending on the stage of that opportunity. So if the stage is negotiation/review, we want the next step to say urgent, follow up by, and then have a date that is 3 days away. But for any other stage, we want the next step to say follow up by and have a date that is 5 days away. So what you can see is it's not every record's being updated with the same value. So the loop's going to kind of need to check each record it's looking at and make the appropriate changes. Oops. So let's dive into this use case.
No, this one is very good. I want to see this.
All right, let's do it. Okay, all right, so this is a record-triggered flow again, and this is running on the account. And again, we're just dealing with an update scenario where the account rating is changed to hot. So what I can do here is select all condition requirements are met. We'll select the rating, and we're going to select equals hot. Now, it's important here in this type of scenario to see this section down here, when to run it for updated records. Every time a record is updated and it meets the conditions, or only when it's changed or updated to meet the conditions. So if I left this as is, every time the account is edited, as long as the rating is hot, this flow is going to keep running over and over. So we don't want that. We only want it to run when it's actually changed to hot. So that's why you select this option here. All right, so what we want to do is we're dealing with the child opportunities. So we want to get the child opportunities that we need. So what we want to get is non-closed child ops. So remember, we're not making changes to ones that are already. So we'll select opportunity. And again, so the way we identify it is by the account, the parent. So they should be the opportunities that are the child of this account. So again, we're using our trusty friend dollar record. So this is basically saying all of the child opportunities of this account. But what we remember here is we don't want all of the stages. So we don't want to deal with closed won or closed lost opportunities. So stage name does not equal closed won, and the stage name does not equal closed lost. So basically, we're going to get all child opportunities that are not closed won or not closed lost. We want to get all of them because we're going to change them all. And I think this is a good example of where we can show not storing all of the values. So here, really, we just need the ID of each opportunity, the stage name, obviously, because that's going to be in our logic. And let's get the next step field as well. And so we'll click done. So that's our get records. So what we want to do is check, are any records returned? Because what could happen is there could be no opportunities that meet the criteria. So if that's the case, we really just want the flow to end. So we'll just call this ops returned. We'll just say yes.
If we don't do this one, if you don't have anywhere records, what happens next?
Yeah, I think what will happen is the loop will start, but it will just kind of stop straight away. So if you look at like the debug logs, it will just show as ending straight away. But I think the problem you might have is then if you actually try to update the collection, it'll either fail. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I can't remember if it'll fail or just do nothing. It's one of those two things. I would need to follow up on that. So that's why you want to really put the decision in place, is just to make sure why take extra steps when you don't need to take extra steps.
Okay.
All right, so this is our get records. So if opportunities are returned, this means it is not null. So the get records is null, is false, which means opportunities, yes, they were returned. So we can click done. And so if there's no opportunities returned, we end the flow like we just kind of spoke about. And so what I'm going to do is create the loop to start. So we'll go to the loop element, and we're just going to loop the returned ops. And so what you do here is you just put in the collection variable from your get records. In this case, I don't think first to last, it doesn't really matter. So we'll just leave that as first item to last. So we've got the loop, at least the framework of the loop set up. But what we now need to do is handle that logic where the next step is different. Because remember, if the stage of the opportunity is negotiation review, the next step should be different than any other stage. So the way to do this is with a formula. So let's start by creating a formula. And so we'll call this generate next step value. And we'll select the data type as text. And I'm going to paste in the formula again, but I will explain it. Okay, so let me just change this. So one thing I want to point you to, so I created the loop a minute ago. And so what you'll see in your flow is you'll see this new resource, current item from the loop. So basically what this is saying is you can use this in your logic to check the one specific record that is currently being looped through. So I'm going to click that here and do stage name. So if we look at this formula, let's see what it's doing. It's saying if the current opportunity being looped through is negotiation review, then return this text, which is urgent, follow up by, and then what it's going to do is it's going to take today's date, add free to it, which is the part. But if you look at the text here, it's going to text. So it's going to get a date value 3 days away and store it as text. And then what it's going to do is going to add it to this first part. So when this flow runs today, this should say urgent, follow up by 7/3/22. Now, if the stage isn't negotiation review, we were just going to default it to 5. So this is the same concept. It's just a different number here, 5 away, and a different message here. So this is what's going to sort of dynamically generate the value to put in the next step field. So we've saved that. Now, the other piece of foundation work, we need a new record collection variable, and that's going to hold all of the opportunities that we update. So I'll just call this ops to update. And we'll select record as the type of data. And now we need to select this checkbox because this is going to potentially have multiple opportunities. And I'll select the object here as opportunities. So this is where all of the records that change, they'll be stored in here before we do the update records. Okay, so we've sort of done the foundation work now for the loop. So let's finish up the loop. So what we do is we have an assignment element. So we'll call this next step value. And what this is going to do is going to assign the next step value. So we'll select current item and next step. And so what we want this to do is we want this to equal the formula. So basically that formula will run on this opportunity. And then after that, what you can do is you can add it to the collection. And so what we'll do is that empty record collection ops to update, we'll put that here. And we'll change this to say add. And then we'll do the current item. And don't need to click anything else. So select current item and click out. So this is basically saying in our collection of opportunities, add the current record in the loop that we just changed. So I'll click done. And then what we need to do is just have the update records outside of the loop. So we'll do update records. I'll select this because we've got them all in a record collection and ops to update. So that's the one that we were adding to the collection. Click done. So this is basically the flow here. Let's save this. Is this flow 4 maybe? I don't remember. We'll save it. Oh, no, it's not flow 4. I got an error saying I already have flow 4, so I guess this is 5. All right, and activate. So this flow should be good to go. Let me open a record that I've prepared to test with. So let's look at this account start. So the account rating is warm. So if we change this to hot, it's going to trigger the flow. And if we look at the opportunities, we've got 4 opportunities. So I'm going to open all of these. Just like to prove that the tests work, so you kind of believe what you're seeing. So test 4. So this opportunity is in the stage of prospecting, and you'll see there's no next step here. So this next step will need to be populated with a day 3 days away. This opportunity is no next step. Wait, hang on. Let me start again. Since this one is in prospecting, this next step should be 5 days away with the message. Since this one is in negotiation, the next step should change to 3 days away with that message. And because this one is closed won and this one is closed lost, these shouldn't change. So we should see nothing in these next step values like it is now. So let's change the account and see if the flow works. Okay, so I've changed it to hot. So if I refresh these these ops, let's see what we have. Okay, so prospecting. So this is the one that we wanted 5 days away. So you see here that it's worked. So that's 5 days away. It's populated that message. We'll refresh this one. And now you see how the formula's returned a different result here. So this is 3 days away, and it's got the urgent in front of it as well. And then hopefully what we should see on these two are no changes. Nothing in the next step. Yep, nothing in next step because it's closed one, and nothing in next step because it's closed lost. So you can see how that flow worked there. And so we made, and the key thing here, the key message with this principle we're covering is minimizing your database changes. So by doing it this way and putting this outside of the loop, we've saved those 4 records in one go instead of saving it 4 times. So that makes your flow more efficient. So that's that use case. Any questions? I can peek at the chat.
Yeah, we have one from René Silva. Does this element of a loop count towards the 2000 limit of executed elements of a flow? If yes, is there a workaround to work with flows iterating thousands of records?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, and I didn't catch the name. Sorry, I missed that. But obviously they've got some flow experience if they've ran into 2000 executed elements. That's a fun one. So workarounds, the first thing is look at your flow, right? So try to optimize your flow as much as possible. So try to consolidate your elements where you can. Make sure your get records are as specific as possible. You can also use the new collection filter if that helps. Once you've exhausted those options, it gets a little bit tricky. I know that there's certain, for certain types of flows, like with screen flows and other ones, there's kind of hacks where you can insert screens to reset the count or use the pause element. But I don't think they're generally particularly recommended. They're kind of hacks. Someone sent me something a long time ago that kind of talks about a way to kind of work around that with platform events, but I haven't had a chance really to read that yet, so I'm not going to comment on that. So to answer your question, I think it gets tough. If you try to improve your flow and optimize your flow and you're still not there, you're going to have to start looking at kind of hacks, or maybe if you have developers, maybe in that case, it's better to use code. I hope that answered the question.
Okay.
How do flows compare with Apex code? Well, I guess it kind of, it sort of depends what's better, right? I think there's different tools for different jobs. So for example, Apex code, you're not going to have to worry about 2000 executed elements. That's not a concern. And just want to make sure everyone on the call is clear what 2000 execute elements is. So let's say that I was looping 1000 records here. Each loop is going to hit 3 elements. So eventually my total elements is going to hit 2000 and my flow is going to fail. There's, for some reason, a limit there. So that's what we're talking about when we say 2000 executed elements. So you could argue, Apex is better because that's not a problem you have to deal with. But at the same time, I think it really depends on your org. And I think it goes back to what you have. If stuff can be done with flow, and you have lots of people that can maintain those flows, and you're not pushing limits and not getting crazy trying to stay within limits, then use flow by all means. But if you have a lot of developers and you have really complex logic, or you're dealing with large volumes, then maybe in those cases, Apex may be better. So I wouldn't say one's better or the other. It's different tools for different jobs, in my opinion. I'm sure there's plenty of people that disagree with me on that, but it's just my perspective.
Questions. One is related about the comparison about Apex and Flow. So Leon Tucson asked, how do flows compare with Apex code? Which is better, or is that the right comparison? Can we compare?
Yeah. And so that was the one I just attempted to answer. So for me, I wouldn't say one is better. I would say it's kind of different tools for different jobs, right? Going back to the example, If the only way you can get around 2,000 executed elements is with code, then, you know, Apex is better in that scenario. But for routine automations where you have lots of admins that can maintain them, I would argue Flow is the right choice. So I wouldn't say better is the right comparison. I would say really just think about what is the right tool for the right job based on all of the people you have in your org. Like, how many people do you have that can write code? How many people do you have that can do flows? So that's what I'd say.
Yeah. Udo Andrade have another question. Recently, I needed to use a loop, but for a greater efficiency, I tried to create a break in the loop. I used an assignment that clears the collection variable that the loop iterates, and the moment the desired condition is reached inside the loop, and it's worked. Is there any other, perhaps more efficient way to do this?
I guess it's kind of hard to say. I'd need to understand why you were breaking the loop. Like, what was the? I'm not sure if there's a use case. I mean, if you want, I could carry on, and if he wants to type up the use case, we could look at it towards the end.
Yeah, Udo, if you want to know better, please send some print screens. I don't know. Or I can put you as a host in the end of the meeting, and you can show us your problem, something like this. What do you think, Steven?
Yeah, and also as well, if you don't have all full details in front of you, feel free to send me a LinkedIn message. I'll try and get you a response as well.
Good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Mauricio asked the last one for now. How do you work with Flow, which pause process in the middle? With pause process, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question. Say that again.
How do you work with Flow with pause process in the middle of the process? In the middle of the flow, I think.
I'm trying to find the question because what were you
saying?
The
questions and answers in the chat, you go in the questions and the answers, Mauricio. Yeah.
Oh, the pause process. Okay. How do you work with Flow with the pause process in the middle? Yeah, you know, I haven't really, in my real life, I haven't come across the need to use the pause element that much. And I don't think it's even in record-triggered flows. Yeah, I think that's more of a screen flow thing. Obviously, it's kind of just when you want things to pause, right? And you want it to resume. I think you resume it on some kind of event. I don't have a great answer for you there. I've not really had to use that for a specific use case. So don't have a good one for you there. I'm sorry. But generally, it's kind of to pause and resume is the concept.
Okay, no problem. Let's go. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So let me share. Sharing. So we went through this use case here. So let's quickly just talk about hard coding IDs. So as some of you probably know, IDs for a component can be different across sandboxes and production. So you want to avoid hard coding IDs in your flow. So like, for example, if you need to set a record type in your flow, generally it's not a good practice to hard code that record type ID. If you look at this example, let's say you have a create records in one sandbox, and then you move that flow to another sandbox where you've hard coded the ID, that same flow is going to break since the record type ID is not the same in that sandbox. So the problem you have with flow, and I'll just jump in actually really quickly here because I think it helps to see. I'm just going to add a random element here, but I want to kind of illustrate the point. Like if you look at $record here, an account, if I wanted to change the record type, all I can do is select the ID. I can't specify the record type by the developer name. So that kind of puts us in a difficult spot because, okay, we can only select the ID, but I shouldn't be hard coding IDs. So what do? So with record types, and this also applies to queues, is you can use get records to get the record type you need. and then you can store that ID and then use it in your flow. So here's an example of a get records on the record type object. And you'll see the filter conditions here is the object and the developer name of the record type, because the developer name doesn't typically change from environment to environment. So what you would do is you would just store the ID in your get records, and then you can use it in your logic. And then doing it this way means you're not hard coding your ID. You're dynamically getting it on the fly, and it will work whenever you move that flow through the environments, as long as you don't go changing your API names, which is generally not a good thing to do. Any questions on hard coding IDs? I kind of kept that one pretty brief, but the same concept applies. You can do like a get records on the group object to get queues as well. All right, I will dive in. So this is going to be our last demo for today. So subflows. So I think an important concept for record triggered flows, but this also applies for other types of flows like screen flows as well, is don't build logic in more than one place. Build it in a subflow that other flows can then call. So what is a subflow? Like if you go to flow and select a type of flow, there isn't one called subflow. A subflow is a auto launch flow. So when you're creating one, you need to select that option. And then once you create that auto launch flow, you can call it from other flows using the subflow element. So what you can do with subflows is you can pass data from one flow to another to like a subflow. The subflow can do stuff with that data, perform calculations, and then it can return some data back to the flow that called it. So it's really good if you have pieces of logic that may need to be called or referenced from lots of different places. You don't repeat that logic all over the place. You build it in a subflow and call it from different places. Now, the one thing that I really still don't like about this feature is you cannot call subflows from before saved flows. So that's still a frustration with Flow for me. But hopefully they improve it in the future. But you can call subflows from screen flows, after save flows, things like that. So let's go through our final demo of the night. So the use case here is, let's assume we're in an org where tasks need to be created for opportunities in lots of different scenarios. Maybe there's old process builders that do it. Maybe there's new flows that call it and create tasks. But the sort of foundational piece of logic is the due date of a task should always be 3 days away if the stage of the opportunity is negotiation review, and 5 days away for any other stage. So what we're going to walk through here is we're going to build a subflow that takes in a stage from an opportunity, calculates a due date, and then returns it to the flow that called it. So let's dive into that. All right. Okay, so let's see, auto launch flow. So you'll see here it says no trigger. So flows don't run on their own. They need someone else to ask it to run. So that's why it says no trigger there. So we'll go ahead and create our auto launch. If you think about the use case is if an opportunity has a certain stage, return a certain date to the flow that called it. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a variable to hold the stage that is given to this subflow, so it knows what it's working with. We can select this as text. And now this is a key thing with subflows, and this available for input and output is something I know confuses a lot of people starting flow. The general gist is if this variable should be able to be populated from something outside this flow, then it's available for input. You select available for output if this variable should be given to something outside of this flow. So in this case, the stage should be available for input because other flows are going to be telling us what the stage is, and then we're going to be calculating the date. So we'll leave that as is. Now, on the flip side, we need a variable to have the due date. So we'll call this var due date. The data type is date, and this is the opposite. So if we think about the use case, when the due date is calculated in this subflow, we want to give it back to the flow that called it. So that's why it's available for output. It means the other flow can access it when this flow is done. So that's the variables created. So what we'll do is we will create a formula to calculate due date, calculate task due date. So the data type is date, and we're going to do this with a formula. And so here's the formula pre-prepared just to save time, but we're saying if the variable stage, the one that's getting past having the stage put in it, if that's negotiation review, then I want that is today plus 3. Otherwise, I want today plus 5. So that's sort of that logic we had for different due dates based on the stage. So I'll go ahead and click done. And then all we need to do is we just need one assignment element. So var due date just equals the formula. And so that's all you need for the subflow. And I just want to show you quickly in debug. So we'll see here what I can do is put in a stage to test this here. So let's just say negotiation review. What I should see, you'll see here how because it's negotiation review, it's calculated 3 days away. So if we just change this to test, anything that isn't negotiation review, it's now 5 days away. So the subflow logic's working as expected. So we can activate this subflow. Now what we need to do is just create a flow to call this subflow. So again, the point here is if you have a subflow, you might have multiple flows calling this. We're just obviously just for the sake of the demo, let's just give an example of one flow calling it. So we've got the we've got the flow running on the opportunity, and it's when the opportunity was updated. Yeah, okay. Actually, I think for this example, I was just leaving this wide open. So this is just going to run when, obviously in a real scenario, you're going to have more condition requirements, but what I'm really trying to demo here is the subflow logic. So we'll just leave this open for simplicity's sake. And you're going to have actions and related records because we're creating a task. All right, so what we want to do, the first thing in this flow we want to do is we want to click subflow. And so you search for the flow. So I called it demo flow 6 up here. And so we'll call this get task due date. And so what I want to do here is now if you have more stuff you're inputting, like if you had complicated subflows, you can kind of choose specifically which input variables you want to set. So what this is doing here, this is what we spoke about. So var stage, that's var stage from this flow over here. So it's saying, what do you want to put in var stage? Well, what we want to put is $record opportunity stage name. So that's passing the opportunity's current stage into that variable in the flow. For this example, we don't need to manually assign variables. What this does is this, if I wanted to, for some reason, put due date in a particular variable, I can select that checkbox and do that. But you don't need to actually do that. I can still access it. So if there was a reason why, then you could select that. So that's getting our due date. So then all we need to do at this point is go ahead and create our task. So we're creating one task, and we're going to just specify the values. So we'll do task. And so the field values, so the what ID, so what the task relates to is going to be $record opportunity. So the ID of the opportunity. Where are we? There we go. And just, again, this would depend on the use case, but we'll just put some values in here. Status not started, priority high, subject, do this task. Now, like if you were building a subflow for task creation, you may want your subflow to handle other logic, like setting all of these other fields too. You might want to think about that, but obviously we'll just kind of keep this one simple. So the due date. And so what we do here is, see here? So now what I can do is click outputs from task from the subflow, and you'll see var due date. So this is what the subflow is calculated. So if I click that and I click done, this should be good to go. So let me activate it. Okay, so we've activated this with no errors. So let me find an opportunity. Oh boy, come on. All right, let's do this one. Okay, all right, so this opportunity is, so this flow is basically gonna run and create, we've just left it pretty open. So just whenever I change this, it should create the task. So let's change this to negotiation review, because then what we should see is we should see a task that's created with a due date of July 3rd. So if I go over to the activity tab, you'll see here. So we click into this task. So all of the values we set, but most importantly, this shows the subflow got the right due date. Now, just to prove that it works for the other one, I delete this task. And I'm going to change this to an earlier stage, needs analysis. So now what we should see is a task get created. Flow's going to call the subflow, but it's going to return a due date of July 5th because it's not in negotiation review. And there you go. You see it here, July 5th. So this is a good example of a subflow. So what we could do now is, like, if we have different scenarios in our org, different flows or processes that need this due date logic, we can call it, and we've not repeated that due date logic multiple times throughout the system. So any questions on subflows, that example?
Leon asked to show again, how do you refer to the subflow again?
Yeah, sure. So refer to it, I assume you mean to actually like call the subflow, like
yes,
reference it?
I guess,
cool. So
I guess so.
Yeah, I'll just delete this and we'll start again. So we're in the after save flow here. So you click to add any element and you'll see subflow here. So you select subflow and then you search for the flow name. So hopefully you'll have more meaningful names than I do for my demo here, but I think we call this demo flow 6. So you've selected the flow, and then obviously you give it the name you want. So get the due date. So you're all set up for the flow now. So what you need to do at this point is just set these variables. So remember var stage. Okay, yes, you've got it. Cool. So yeah, you would just do it, and then you would put in the $record stage. Yeah.
Yeah. Gabriel has another question. Gabriel Brewer. Which one is better? Use the get component to get record type ID, or use the formula entry criteria record type dot name equal test, for example?
Yeah, so they're different things. So in the entry criteria, you can't do a get records of any kind, right? Well, let me think about this. So trying to understand the question, are you asking about whether like the entry criteria has the ability to fetch any record type ID? Just want to make sure I'm understanding before I try and answer. Let me read the question again.
It
Which one is
is,
that?
I put on the chat.
So my answer would be, based on what I read here, is I think they're different things. So what you're doing here is, in this entry criteria, you're checking the current record type on the opportunity. You're not trying to like find out what a record type ID is. And I haven't got record type set up in my org here, but what you would see here is you would see a record type with a dash and you would click it. and then you could use the record type developer name. But the get records is a bit more different. The get records component is used when you're doing like, you need to create a record or update a record, and you need to decide what ID to put on it. Because the reason is you can't set it based on the name. You need the ID. Let me switch to an account. I think I actually had an account record type set up. Okay. Check that. $record. Okay, all right. So let's take both use cases, entry conditions and the component to get it. So I would use you use the formula in the entry conditions if you want to do something like, I only want to run this flow if the record type is of a certain record type. So here, developer name equals, and then whatever your record type name is. So this is the use case for this. You're saying run this flow if the record type is currently this. Now, the get component is kind of for a different scenario. The get component's saying that, like, okay, I want to update an account and I need to find out an ID of the appropriate record type. So I say get account record type. So we get the record type object. And so you select your object here, account, and then you put your name here, whatever that is. And then you select only the record, and then you select to store the ID. So what this is doing is, for the account, it's getting the record type of whatever the name is and storing its ID. So the reason you need to do that is if we click out of here, like let's say we go to try and update a record and we want to set the record type field. You see here, when I search record, I only got ID. So I have to know what the ID is to set the value. So that's why you need to get records. So to answer the question, I would say they're used for different things. Entry criteria is, the formula is used to decide if you want to trigger a flow based on a record type. The get component is when you need to assign a new record type ID and you need to find out what that ID is. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, he understood the answer.
All right, cool, good. Okay. Yeah, so just to kind of recap, these were the things we covered today. So making sure you really understand the power of $record. You're going to use that a ton in record triggered flows. So kind of get familiar playing around with it. Follow that golden rule we spoke about for before and after say flows. Figure out the flows per object strategy. And I really do love the question someone asked about the number of flows, because that is an incredibly important thing to consider in that. So definitely keep your org in mind and how big that could get. Consolidate your database changes, don't hard code your IDs, and then look for opportunities to build subflows. And that's it. I was really happy and kind of honored that I got to speak to friends down in Brazil today. So thank you so much for having me. And I write about Flow on LinkedIn every Monday through Friday. So please feel free to connect or follow with me and let me know any questions you have when you see what I write about. But that's all I've got.
And thank you so much for your presentation and for your class, Stephen. It was very, 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 very good. I am pretty sure that everybody liked it a lot. I recorded it. Okay, I will publish in YouTube if you you let me to do it. Can I publish it?
Yeah.
Okay. I will draw vouchers now for the participants of this class that you gave. Okay. So does anyone have any questions for Stephen? Everybody is thankful for your presentation. Ok. Thank you, everybody. Muito obrigado, pessoal. Foi muito legal. I will speak a little bit in Portuguese to those that don't understand very well English, but okay. Vou sortear os vouchers agora. I will draw the vouchers now. Okay, I will share my screen. Let me see here. I will take only the participants that made the check-in here, that checked in this class, okay? So we have a lot of subscribers. 1 second. Okay, can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay. So here are the participants here. I deleted my name and the Stephen names, okay? We have 52 persons here. So the numbers of each person is in the left side of this name, okay? If anyone doesn't see his name here, please tell me. Now it's time, okay? So I will get in a site, website, sorteador. Draw the numbers. 3 vouchers, okay? The vouchers are about $400, the full certification vouchers. I will draw 3 numbers between 1 and 52. Ok? Mostrar resultados, visualizar. Deixa eu clicar, adicionar contagem regressiva. Ok. Good luck, everybody. Let's see. Six. Let's see who is 6. Bianca Paz. Bianca Paz is there. Is here. Let's check. Oh, she isn't. Okay, let's go to the next one. I will draw again because we have to, the person have to be online, okay? So let's exclude Bianca here. 17, who is the 17? Fernando Leite. Fernando Leite is here. Fernando, você está aí? Let's check. Fernando Leite is here. Congratulations, man. Parabéns. Fernando Leite, who is the next one? 47. 47 is Udo. Udo Andrade. Udo Andrade was here before. Let's check if he's here. Udo Andrade is here. Congratulations, Udo. So I will draw again, okay? And the numbers, I will exclude the Udo Andrade and Fernando, okay? A second. Fernando. Okay, number again. Let's go. 1, 2, 49 now. Only one. Let's go. 42 is the number. Let's see. 42 is Tainara Santos de Sena. Tainara Santos de Sena is here. Let's check it out. Tainara Santos. Tainara Santos is here. Congratulations, Tainara. Okay, guys. So, Tainara, Udo, and Fernando, congratulations. Stephen, thank you very much again. I hope we talk soon. I will ask you to join in the next events of the community. And I hope we can do another event with another 6 conditions or 6 variables that we can create. Let's see, 6 steps that we can do in Flow. Thank you very much, everybody. I posted the LinkedIn profile of Stephen Church here in the fixed messages in the chat. Please follow him. He's very good in posting. He posts every day, almost every day, right, Stephen?
Take a break for the weekends, but Monday through Friday,
Yeah, very nice tips. I follow every one of them, so it's very good. Pessoal, muito obrigado. Obrigado novamente. Thank you, Stephen. Last words?
No, just thank you very much for having me. It was great to be here. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you on LinkedIn. Let me know if you have any questions when I post something.
Great. Thank you, everybody. See you guys. Thank you, everybody. It was late. Here in Brazil, it's 9 p.m. So thank you very much. It was a great class. It's great. Thank you for your time. Okay?
Yeah.
Obrigado, pessoal, pelo tempo. Muito legal vocês ficarem aqui até o final. Foram 42 pessoas. Até o próximo evento. Um abraço. Thank you, Stephen. Bye, bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.